Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're tearing down the anatomy of a breakthrough. Have you ever set this massive, life-altering goal only to watch your motivation just totally fizzle out a few weeks later? Yeah, you're definitely not alone. In this Explainer, we're going to dig into the hard science of exactly why we fail at those huge goals. But more importantly, we're building a structured, brain-based toolkit for real, lasting change. Let's get right into it. Let's kick things off with a pretty jarring number: 43%. According to a daily experience study by researcher Wendy Wood, 43% of our everyday behaviors are performed entirely out of habit. Just think about that for a second. Nearly half of your entire life is running on absolute autopilot, without you even making a conscious choice.
Okay, let's dive into this, because this idea from James Clear perfectly sets the stage for everything we're about to cover. He says, we do not rise to the level of our goals. We fall to the level of our systems. You know, we've always been taught that success requires these massive, wildly ambitious goals. But honestly, big goals just overwhelm our brains. They create this huge, intimidating gap between where we are right now and where we want to be. Reliable systems, though, that's what actually builds the real, tangible progress we're looking for.
Which brings us to Act 1, the illusion of immediate success. We live in a world that completely romanticizes the overnight success story. But behavioral science tells a very different tale.
If you're feeling stuck, you're probably trapped in what's known as the plateau of latent potential. This is that invisible, frustrating delay where the gap between putting in the hard work and actually seeing the results feels absolutely intolerable. But listen, hitting this wall isn't a failure. It's actually a necessary gathering of potential. It's kind of like a stonecutter striking a rock. They might hit it 37 times with zero visible effect, but on that 38th blow, it splits perfectly in two. The work from those first 37 strikes wasn't wasted at all. It was just being stored up for the big breakthrough.
All right, welcome to Act 2, the biology of behavior. To really understand why breaking old habits is so incredibly hard, we have to literally look at our hardwiring.
It all boils down to this fascinating biological process called synaptic pruning. Basically, your brain actively prunes away the neural connections you don't use and drastically strengthens the ones you use all the time. Every single time you repeat a behavior, the neural pathways supporting it get physically stronger and way faster. Your brain is quite literally rewiring itself based on whatever it is you do every single day.
To put that into perspective, consider this wild biological reality. Researchers at Oxford University found that a newborn baby actually has 41% more neurons than the average adult. Crazy, right? A newborn's brain is just a blank canvas. Endless possibilities, but super weak connections. By the time you reach adulthood, your brain has pruned away 41% of those possibilities just to become highly efficient. Your adult brain has hardwired your daily routines so they run lightning fast and are deeply, deeply ingrained.
And here is where all that automaticity actually lives. This little structure deep inside the brain is called the basal ganglia. Its entire job is just to save you mental energy. You can think of it as your brain's ultimate battery saver mode. Once the basal ganglia takes over, shifting your repeated actions from conscious, deliberate effort into automatic routines, you don't even have to think about what you're doing anymore. It just happens.
Moving right along to Act 3, Systems over Goals. Now that we understand the biological why, let's completely shift your mindset to the strategic what.
Here is a fundamental shift in how we need to think. Goals are all about the results and winning the game. Systems, on the other hand, are about the processes and continuing to play the game. Big goals practically guarantee burnout because the finish line is just so far away. Systems, though, focus on the daily process. And here's the best part. By completing your small, daily system, you give your brain the immediate dopamine hits it absolutely craves, which naturally reinforces that behavior over time.
Now, an amazingly powerful part of any good system is what we call a keystone habit. These are small, foundational changes that trigger a total domino effect of positive transformation across your entire life. So, for example, if you focus purely on just one single keystone habit, maybe it's morning meditation or regular exercise, it naturally spills over. Suddenly, you might find you're eating better, your emotional balance improves, your productivity gets sharper, all cascading from that one single foundational change. But let's be real, sheer willpower is almost never enough to build these systems. To truly make a change stick, we can look at the ABC model from cognitive behavioral therapy. Step 1 is the activating event, like a specific cue. Step 2 is your belief, the thoughts and feelings you attach to that event.
And step 3 is the consequence, your actual behavioral response. If you want to drive a new consequence, you can't just force it. You absolutely must deliberately change the underlying belief. If you believe exercise is absolute torture, well, the consequence is going to be procrastination, right? Change the belief and you completely change the behavior.
And that brings us to the climax of our explainer, Act 4, the Habit Building Toolkit. Let's roll up our sleeves and look at some highly actionable steps you can start using literally today.
So the crucial point here is understanding the neurological feedback loop. Every single habit follows this exact 4-step process to create that automaticity in the brain we talked about. First, there's a cue that triggers you. Second, a craving, which acts as the motivational force. Third, the response, which is the actual habit you perform. And fourth, the reward, which satisfies that craving and essentially tells your brain, hey, remember this exact loop for the future.
The beauty is, we can intentionally hack that exact feedback loop using James Clear's 4 laws of behavior change. To build a solid good habit, you make the cue obvious, you make the craving attractive, you make the response incredibly easy, and you make the reward satisfying. And guess what? It works beautifully in reverse too. If you're trying to break a bad habit, you just invert those laws. Make the cue completely invisible, make the craving unattractive, make the response really difficult, and make the reward totally unsatisfying.
One of the absolute best ways to make a habit obvious and easy is a technique called habit stacking. The formula is beautifully simple. After my current habit, I will do my new habit. This method is rooted in BJ Fogg's Tiny Habits research, and it's just a brilliant way to piggyback new actions right onto those strong, pre-existing neural pathways we discussed earlier. So instead of relying on an arbitrary time on the clock, you anchor your new habit to something your brain already does automatically every single day.
In action, this needs to be highly specific. So, after I pour my morning cup of coffee, I will meditate. After I take off my work shoes, I will immediately put on my gym clothes. After I sit down to dinner, I will say one thing I'm grateful for. The secret sauce here is extreme specificity. A goal like eat better is just way too vague. The cue has to be highly specific and immediately actionable, so your basal ganglia knows exactly when it's time to kick in.
Finally, we enter Act 5, the compounding payoff. Let's look at the massive, long-term impact of actually sticking to your daily systems. And this brilliantly illustrates how these small patterns build on top of one another over time to create something truly massive. It is exactly like financial compounding. One tiny 1% improvement doesn't look like much today. In fact, it's barely even noticeable. But when you stack those minor improvements day after day after day, the results become exponential and honestly massive.
Now, we all know getting started is usually the hardest part, but you can actually hack your psychology to get over that hump using the Zeigarnik effect. This is the psychological tension our brains naturally maintain around unfinished tasks. By simply starting a tiny, almost ridiculously small action, you leverage this effect. It creates this mental hook that actually pulls you to finish the task. It's proof that action actually creates motivation, not the other way around.
Let's move to and see how this builds into an undeniable mathematical truth. If you can get just 1% better each day for 1 year, you don't just end up a little bit better, you end up 37.8 times better by the time the year is done. Conversely, if you get 1% worse every day, you decline almost all the way down to 0. It is a staggering reality that perfectly shows exactly how powerful small actions are over time. Which leaves us with this provocative question. What small vote will you cast for your future identity today? Because true behavior change isn't just about achieving a specific result. It's a complete identity shift. You really don't need a massive overhaul to change your life. You just need to cast one small vote, build the system, and let your brain's biology handle the rest. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. The polls are open, so what's your vote going to be?